Here's how the basic combo works. By activating Pressured Planet Wraitsoth, you can add Kashtira Unicorn from your deck to your hand. Then you can special summon that Unicorn and use the effect to add Kashtiratheosis. Kashtiratheosis then lets you target your Kashtira Unicorn and special summon out Kashtira Fenrir from your deck in defense position. And with the effect of Fenrir, you can add Kashtira Riseheart, and then, because you control a Kashtira monster, you can special summon that Riseheart from your hand. Then, using both Unicorn and Fenrir, you overlay for Kashtira Shangri-Ira. And after that, you use the effect of Reisheart that's still in the field, banishing Kashtira Big Bang from your deck for cost, to banish 3 cards to the top of your opponent's deck face down while making Reisheart level 7. This then lets you trigger both Shangri-Ira to block off your opponent's zone from being used, and Kashtira Big Bang to special summon out either of your Kashtira monsters that are attached to Shangri-Ira. And because you managed to use the effect of Shangri-Ira, you can special summon out Kashtira Riseheart using Reisheart as material. Then, during your opponent's standby phase, you activate the effect of Shangri-Ira to special summon out another Kashtira name from your deck. So with a single Wraitsoth, you have Shangri-Ira to block zones and to summon out another Kashtira name from your deck. A Kashtira Fenrir to banish an opponent's card face down, a Kashtira Unicorn to banish an opponent's extra deck card face down, a pop from Wraitsoth after you use any of Shangri-Ira's effects, and a Riseheart, a Macrocosmos that can also banish any card from the field face down at quick effect speed. The Kashtira engine can vary in size based on what you want from the engine. A really small and basic Kashtira engine is actually only comprised of 2 to 3 copies of Fenrir, and this engine gives any deck a board breaker that can also be used going first and gives you a free card in hand. But if you want more of the Kashtira cards, you can play a bigger engine of up to 3 Wraitsoth, Unicorn, Fenrir, a Riseheart, Kashtiratheosis, and Birth, alongside up to 1 copy of each of Scareclaw Kashtira, Tearlament's Kashtira, and Kashtira Big Bang. The engine gives you really easy access to rank 7 monsters, as well as the main Kashtira boss monster, Kashtira Shangri-Ira, and Kashtira Riseheart, both of which are played at 3 copies. However, both Scareclaw and Tearlament strategies actually cross archetypes with Kashtira, and as a result, their Kashtira engine looks a bit different to most decks. These decks can play up to 3 copies of the specific Kashtira card, and can play either Fenrir or Wraitsoth to search out these cards as well. Now, let's get into what these cards actually do, starting with the main deck. Pressured Planet Wraitsoth is the deck's main consistency tool. It's a field spell with the same theming as the other field spells in the Visa Starfrost lore, and as a result comes with a search, an attack boost, and a pop. You can only activate 1 Wraitsoth per turn, and when you do, you can search any Kashtira monster in your deck, making it both a great consistency tool and a way to find your extenders in case your plays are interrupted. And while you control Wraitsoth, all your monsters gain 100 attack and defense for every different attribute on the field. This includes your opponent's monsters. And because all the Kashtira monsters have different attributes, there's a really good chance that your monsters end up being boosted by 600 or 700 if there happens to be a divine monster on the field. And last but not least, on a new chain, after you've used the effect of Kashtira Shangri-Ira, on a hard once per turn, you can target a card in the field and destroy it. This is a really nice bonus effect which you can use both on your turn to clear away your opponent's board, or even as an interruption on your opponent's turn, provided that you banish a card face down with something like Fenrir or a Riseheart so that you can use the effect of Shangri-Ira. But the strongest aspect of Wraitsoth is of course the search. Usually you're grabbing Kashtira Unicorn, the deck's main combo starter. Unicorn comes with a summoning condition similar to Super Quanto Red Laser, where if you control monsters, you can just special summon from your hand for free without activating an effect. This gives you access to Unicorn's 2 incredibly strong on-field effects. Its second effect triggers either after Unicorn has declared an attack, or on a new chain after your opponent has used a monster effect, and lets you look at your opponent's extra deck and banish 1 card of your choice from it face down. This not only gives you free information about your opponent's extra deck options, but also lets you remove those options from the game entirely, which is really useful for getting rid of cards like Zeus, which can easily deal with Kashtira boards, or for getting rid of your opponent's combo pieces. Sniping out these options is so strong in fact that even prior to the release of the latest Kashtira support in Photon Hypernova, Unicorn saw a lot of experimentation as a generic tool to counter Tearlaments, since the moment your opponent activated a monster effect, you could just banish their strongest combo tool, Tearlament Kid Kalos, before they had a chance to fusion summon it. And because it's a wind monster, it can even be used against Floowandereeze as a way to more easily outbear your statue. This tech got so popular that in order to counter it, as well as Diablosis the Mind Hacker, Tearlaments began playing 2 copies of Kit Kalos in the extra deck just so they'd have their best combo tool in case the Unicorn was activated. And this isn't even the only great effect of Unicorn, because its search effect is actually integral for Kashtira. You can't search Wraitsoth since it's technically not a Kashtira spell, but you do still have 2 excellent search targets in both Kashtira Birth and Kashtiratheosis. Kashtiratheosis is the primary search target for Unicorn, and for good reason since Theosis has 2 great effects, one that you can use from the hand and the other that activates when it's banished. Its first effect is basically an e-tailing for the archetype, and lets you summon out a Kashtira from your deck. But in order to activate it, you do need to target a Kashtira monster you control, and the Kashtira monster you summon must be a different attribute to the one you targeted. So you can't summon a Fenrir after targeting Scareclaw Kashtira since they're both earth monsters. But you could summon out Tearlament's Kashtira since it's water. And for the rest of the turn after you use Theosis, you're locked into only being able to summon Xyz monsters from your extra deck. With this first effect, you're usually targeting your Wind Unicorn so you can summon out your Earth Fenrir from your deck, because Fenrir can be used to grab Reisheart or another extender. But Kashtiratheosis is a really versatile card, so you can target just about any Kashtira monster to bring out whatever else you need. Its second effect is just as versatile and can get you free follow-up, because whenever it's banished, you can target one of your banished Kashtira cards and add it to your hand. The only issue is that it has to be banished, which sounds difficult at first, but Kashtira has a number of ways to trigger this effect, from tier limits Kashtira to Kashtira Riseheart, and even with their main boss monster, Kashtira Riseheart. If you've already got access to Kashtiratheosis, you can use Unicorn's effect to search out Kashtira Birth. Birth is a solid extender that also lets you interact with your opponent's graveyard. The first effect lets you normal summon out a level 7 monster without tributing. This is a really nice bonus because it means that if you've got any stray Kashtira in hand that you can't summon because you control a monster, you can just normal summon it with Birth for free instead, making it a great way to unclog your hand. But that's not all, because if your opponent activates a spell card while you control any Kashtira monsters with Birth up, you can target exactly 3 cards in your opponent's graveyard and banish them face down. This lets you deal with some of your opponent's best graveyard resources before they have a chance to use them, like Keldo, Mudora, or Kit Kalos, that they'd want to use for a fusion summon. But the strongest effect of Birth is its Reborn effect, which lets you special summon any non-Xyz Kashtira monster from either your graveyard or your face-up banish zone. This acts as an archetypal copy monster Reborn that summons from the banished pile as well, which is already good enough, but because it's continuous, you can use this Reborn effect every turn, making it a great extender on turn 1, and free follow-up on later turns. Unicorn does technically have other search targets, but they're often not as played as Kashtiratheosis and Birth, since their effects are a lot worse and don't really help the engine. In contrast, Kashtira Fenrir is one of the most helpful cards in the archetype because, like Unicorn, it has 2 strong effects. One that's helpful for making your own boards, and another that's used for breaking your opponents. It also has the same summoning condition as Unicorn, where you can special summon from your hand for free, provided you control no monsters. Its main effects, though, are a little bit different. Its second effect occurs on a new chain after your opponent has activated a monster effect or after Fenrir declares an attack, just like Unicorn. But instead of banishing a card from your opponent's extra deck face down, Fenrir lets you target a face-up card in the field and banish it face down. This effect is part of the reason Fenrir is often dubbed as the latest Dino Wrestler Pankratops, because a lot of decks can use Fenrir generically as a low investment tool whose effect can be used as a board breaker, a way to out floodgates, or even when going first as an extra interruption. And because Fenrir also got to search a card, this made it a really free board breaker, even in non-Kashtira decks, because your Fenrir could search for another copy of itself. But it's in a heavier Kashtira engine where Fenrir shines, because instead of just adding another Fenrir, you have a wider array of options available to you. You can still just search Fenrir, of course, but you can also use Fenrir to search for Unicorn if you have Birth access to summon it out to the field. You can search for an extender like Tier Limits Kashtira, but more likely than not, your Fenrir will usually be grabbing Kashtira Riseheart, because Riseheart has 2 key effects which make it an integral combo piece for Kashtira, since it allows them easy access to rank 7s as well as their main boss monster. Its first effect locks you into only being able to summon out Xyz monsters from your extra deck for the rest of the turn, but lets you special summon it from your hand if you control a Kashtira monster, which makes it a really free extender that you can search off of Fenrir. The only issue with Riseheart is that it's level 4, which means that it doesn't really work well with the level 7 Kashtira monsters for Xyz plays. But with its second effect, you can actually modulate Riseheart's level, because during the turn it's summoned, you can banish a Kashtira card for cost from your deck face up, so you can banish 3 cards from the top of your opponent's deck face down while making Riseheart a level 7. This means that Riseheart can actually be used for rank 7 plays, but this effect also does 2 other really important things. Because it banishes cards on top of your opponent's deck face down, you can trigger the effect of Kashtira Shangri-Ira on your first turn to block off an opponent's unused zone. This can be used to get closer to locking your opponent out of the game, but the crucial part is that it causes Shangri-Ira to activate in the first place, which allows you to summon out a Riseheart from your extra deck using just a single Kashtira monster, making it absurdly easy to go into. And lastly, Riseheart's cost is actually really beneficial, because you can either use it to banish a Kashtira monster you can summon back with Birth, or you can instead banish a Kashtira spell or trap card with a beneficial effect on a banish, like a Kashtiratheosis for free follow-up, or Kashtira Big Bang for extension. Because when Big Bang is banished, you get to target a Kashtira Xyz monster you control, so you can detach a Kashtira monster from it to add it to your hand, and either keep it for follow-up, or special summon it from your hand. This on-banish effect pairs excellently with Riseheart, since by banishing for cost, it's an easy way to just get another free body on field for rank 7 plays. The issues with Big Bang, however, is that it's sort of a brick, because while its on-field effect can be useful, it's somewhat niche, even despite being an archetypal evenly matched. You can only activate it while you control a Kashtira Xyz monster, and when it's used, both players are forced to banish monsters from the field face down, so they both only control one. Into strategies that swarm the field like Sprite, this effect can be solid, but because it clears your own field as well, and you need to set up with the Kashtira Xyz monsters so it can be used in the first place, you'd rather just have a Big Bang in deck to be banished off of Rise. But its banish effect is so good for extension that Kashtira players choose to play a copy of it anyways. Although, if you already have Reisheart in hand, your Fenrir could instead search for one of the deck's alternative extenders in Tearlament's Kashtira or Scareclaw Kashtira. These cards both share a quick effect that lets you special summon them out during the main phase, but after you summon them out, you either have to banish a Kashtira card or a card from the respective archetype from your hand or graveyard. This might sound like a detriment at first, but it gives you a really easy way to banish the Kashtira spell or trap cards like Kashtiratheosis or Big Bang, so you can use their on-banish effects really easily if they happen to have found their way into the graveyard. But that's not all, because Tearlaments and Scareclaw Kashtira come with their own unique benefit. Scareclaw Kashtira gives you a monster with a high defense that can attack while in defense position and uses defense stats for damage calculation, which gives Kashtira a searchable way of easily outing Baguska. Meanwhile, Tearlament's Kashtira gives you a way of milling 3 cards off of your own deck or your opponent's, so you can either set up your graveyard for something like Birth, or if a Riseheart is on field, you can send cards from your opponent's deck to the graveyard instead, banishing them and potentially cutting off some of their engine pieces. But as well as in Kashtira, both Scareclaw and Tearlament's Kashtira see play in Scareclaw and Tearlament's, and these decks may even play copies of Fenrir or Wraitsoth just to be able to search these cards out. Scareclaw Kashtira sees play in Scareclaw just because it's a solid extender that you can use for the link summon of either Scareclaw Lightheart or Scareclaw Tryheart. But Tearlament's Kashtira is absurd in Tearlament specifically. Its on-summon effect is incredible for the deck, since you can just choose to mill 3 cards to the top of your own deck, giving Tearlaments yet another way of milling their tier names, Ishizu names, or anything with a good graveyard effect. And if you happen to mill Tearlament's Kashtira, you can activate its graveyard effect, which also just so happens to be another free mill, letting you send another 2 cards on top of your deck to the graveyard. So if you use both effects of Tearlament's Kashtira in a turn, you're milling 5 cards from the top of your deck. But that's not even the end of the Tearlament's Kashtira's utility, because it's not just about the number of cards it can mill, it's when it can mill them. You see, because its effect is quick effect, you can use Tearlament's Kashtira before you've even gotten to your first turn, letting you summon it to the field and mill cards as a hand trap, making it just an extra 3 copies of Tearlament's Halfness. This does mean that you'll have to banish a Tearlament's card from your hand, but it's more than worth it to potentially trigger your Tearlament's graveyard effects, so that you can either set up interaction or drown an advantage before your opponent has reached their first end phase. This special summon effect is also a great way to beat one of Tearlament's best counters, the Bystials. Because whenever your opponent uses a Bystial monster to try to banish your Tearlament monster into your graveyard after you use a fusion effect, you can chain Tearlament's Kashtira to summon itself out and banish your monster in the graveyard. Your fusion effect still won't go through, but you'll get to summon out a free body that mills 3 cards from your deck while preventing your opponent's Magma Hut from hitting the field and getting its search during the end phase. All of these factors are why Tearlaments run 3 copies of Tearlament's Kashtira, even if they don't run any other Kashtira cards in their deck. But in terms of actual Kashtira deck, it's fun at fewer copies since it's really just more of an extender in Kashtira than it is a huge playmaker like it is in Tier. Now that we've looked into the important main deck cards, let's talk about the deck's main payoffs in the extra deck, starting with Kashtira Shangri-Ira. In terms of payoff, Shangri-Ira is a good one because it has 3 amazing effects and is really easy to access since it only needs 2 or more level 7 monsters. Its first effect lets you summon out a Kashtira monster from your deck during each standby phase. This is really helpful since you can use Ira's effect to strengthen your end board with either a Fenrir or a Unicorn to use the disruptive effects on your opponent's turn and their search effects on your turn. Ira's other effect protects it from destruction, in a similar way to Dingirsu, where if it would be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can detach material from Ira instead, so a lot of great board breakers like Dark Hole aren't as devastating against Kashtira as they could be. Shangri-Ira's most interesting effect though, is the one that blocks off your opponent's zones. Because if a card in your opponent's possession is banished face down, you can choose any of your opponent's main monster or spell and trap card zones and stop your opponent from using them at all while you control your face-up Shangri-Ira. This lets you restrict your opponent's options by a lot, especially because all of the Kashtira monsters happen to have effects which can banish your opponent's possessions face down. So it's actually really easy to block off a ton of your opponent's zones on the first turn. And if you happen to block off all of your opponent's monster zones, they can't summon monsters at all. Or if you happen to block off your opponent's spell and trap card zones, your opponent is locked out of spells and trap cards. In fact, if you target even a single pendulum scale, your opponent can't pendulum summon at all since they'd only be able to place a single scale. This effect is actually why Swords of Concealing Light and Book of Eclipse have become common staples to counter Kashtira. You see, Shangri-Ira is protected from board breakers like Raigeki, and its zone locking is actually a lingering effect, so even if it's negated with Dark Ruler, the zones that were locked still won't be able to be used. However, Book of Eclipse and Concealing Light make it so that Shangri-Ira is no longer face up on the field, freeing them from the zone locking so you can actually play the game. But there's one more aspect of Shangri-Ira that makes it even stronger, because if you manage to use any effect of Shangri-Ira, it suddenly becomes incredibly easy to bring out Kashtira's main boss monster, Kashtira Riseheart. You see, a Reisheart is basically just a macrocosmos on legs, because while it's on field, any card that would be sent to the graveyard is banished instead. This effect is crazy because it cuts off your opponent from using their graveyard entirely, which is especially important on graveyard-reliant strategies, since while a Riseheart is on the field, a deck like Tearlaments can't play at all. But that's not where a Riseheart's strength ends, because it also comes with removal, as on a soft once per turn at quick effect speed, By detaching 3 Xyz materials from a Riseheart, you can target any card in the field and banish it face down. The only downside to a Riseheart is how many cards you need to summon it normally, since it requires 3 level 7 monsters as materials, so it's a pretty huge investment, even for as strong as its effects are. But a Riseheart actually comes with its own unique alternative summon condition, where if you've activated an effective Kashtira Shangri-Ira that turn, you can special summon out a Riseheart using only a single Kashtira monster as an Xyz material. And this summoning condition is laughably easy to fulfill, since you can trigger the zone blocking effect of Shangri-Ira with the effect of Riseheart by using his effect to banish the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck face down. From there, you can use the effect of Ira to block off a zone, and then summon a Riseheart on top of Riseheart. But because you summon out a Riseheart with only 1 material, you don't get access to its removal effect, because that effect requires you to detach 3 Xyz materials for cost. However, a Riseheart actually has a way for you to get more materials on it quickly, because whenever a card is banished, including because of its floodgate, a Riseheart's mandatory effect triggers and forces you to attach a banished card to it as a material, letting you choose from your own banished pile or even your opponent's. This effect is once per chain and not once per turn, so every single chain where a card is banished, you get a free material on a Riseheart, allowing you to quickly build up from 1 material to 3 after just 2 chains. This effect is also really important because of the fact you get to choose what card gets attached to Riseheart as material, which means you can attach a Kashtira Big Bang or a Kashtiratheosis to it, so that when you detach them, they'll get banished again, so you can use their on-banish effects again. Or if you've activated Pot of Prosperity this turn, you can use the effect of a Reisheart to attach one of your face-down banished extra cards to it as a material. And if you happen to attach an Infinite Track Goliath to a Reisheart from your banished zone, the Reisheart can no longer be destroyed by card effects because of the effect of Infinite Goliath, as a Reisheart just so happens to be a machine-type monster. Overall, a Reisheart is an absurd card, and the reason to play Kashtira, or any kind of Kashtira Engine, especially right now where its floodgate is positioned to be amazingly strong against tier limits. Hey, before we end the video, did you know I have a Pokemon channel? Did you know there was a card that Pokemon TCG which was banned and all it did was shuffle your graveyard back into your deck? If you want to know why this effect was so ridiculously powerful in the Pokemon TCG, you should check out my video going over some of the banned cards in that game, which you can click on screen right now.